This gentleman really doesn't need a introduction. He's been here about 3 or 4 times over the years. And he's been very helpful in getting the $400,000 we needed to build on to our village office and do the little museum we're doing. He also was very instrumental in helping stop the Eastern Corridor coming through here through our lower aid. So he's a great friend of Marymount, Dr. Ken Tankers.
The truth is, Dan's the real hero. I mean, I know no one who works harder for Marymount than Dan. I mean, he's there fighting all the time. So what I'm going to be talking about this evening is a lot of, I think, of why Dan does what he does. I mean, the National Park Service, keep in mind, the National Park Service, the regional director of the National Park Service came here this summer to see what Marymount was doing right and using Marymount as an exemplary community throughout the United States. I mean, talk about pure Americana. So could I have the lights, please, so maybe you'll show up a little bit better, Mike? Thank you. Hopefully it's not too dark for you.
That's kind of too dark. Are there other options?
No, that was okay.
It's good. Is that okay?
Yeah. That was okay.
There's a Prius back there.
So, what makes Marymount unique, and I know it's part of Mayor Policastro's mission, is the aspect, and I've heard him say this many, many times in many different forums, is that what makes Marymount unique is its historic preservation. And what I'd like to communicate this evening is just talk a bit about what are some of the values of a village which focuses its effort on historic preservation to the point that it attracts the National Park Service. And looking at, I mean, truly, from the beginning, the word national exemplar actually fits Marymount quite nicely. So the question has come up. It came up, as Dan mentioned, this past summer. It was not a nice time. It was quite a battle. Why should we preserve the prehistoric archaeological sites and historic buildings and structures of Marymount? Isn't this esoteric? Do they have any real value? And we heard people say, no, we don't care. But on the other hand, there is great reason to care, and that's what I'd like to talk about this evening. There are many historic preservation benefits that benefits not only everyone who lives in Marymount, but also everyone such as me who comes and visits Marymount as well. And whether you realize it or not, people come from all over the world to visit Marymount. I think that's one of the more well-kept secrets. One is cultural. Every time we have guests at the University of Cincinnati and I have the opportunity to host them, I bring them to Marymount. I bring them here to eat, we walk around the community, I show them the sites, and one of the things they all take back is although everyone here lives in the state of Ohio, you're part of Hamilton County, a part of the greater Cincinnati community, there's something unique culturally about Marymount and the people who live here. There's something very unique culturally, and that was by design, going back to John Noakes and Mary Emery. That's not by accident. There's definitely both living culture, but also there's material culture in the way Marymount is structured. And also, as I've been alluding to, there's the social aspect. I mean, my favorite place, I love hanging out in your Starbucks. It's one of I can't tell you how many books I've sat and read during the summertime at Starbucks. One of my favorite things, Mayor Policastro once mentioned, I don't know how many of you stood where this sign is, face Marymount and then turn around, face Fairfax. No offense to the people of Fairfax, but I mean, it's kind of obvious. So Marymount has an aesthetic quality to it. And of course, there's the economic aspect. one of the things that keeps the wonderful economy of Marymount is its historic preservation. All of these ultimately go into the national landmark status of Marymount. And of course, one of the things that really I mean, how many mayors you know that plant trees? I know one, that actually plants trees and cares about trees. So there's an environmental aspect. The fact you look around and where are the telephone poles? And you look in Dogwood Park, there are mature, old growth hardwoods, beech trees, oak trees that were here at the time when Phoebe Ferris was alive. I mean, it's quite remarkable. So all of these qualities go into the aspects of historic preservation. And of course, I mentioned Phoebe Ferris. It goes back to the beginning. The Ferris family had a profound impact on selecting this land. Marymount was originally part of the original property of the Ferris family. But although her father was largely responsible for the acquisition of the land, no one fought more to preserve this environment. And she's laying to rest not very far from where I'm standing and you're sitting right now. As you can see, I don't know, has anyone visited her grave besides me? I'm probably the only, someone else has, excellent. So, and of course we're very fortunate, 2 homes, which are, one of course is in Fairfax, but to have homes that are on the National Register of Historic Places. They're on the National Register of Historic Places not only for their significant architecture, but think about the people who live there. I always think about when I go past Phoebe Ferris's home, I look up and I always think about the bedroom where she passed. But what a lot of people don't realize is, does anyone recognize these birds?
North Carolina parakeet.
Excellent.
And the Holman's.
That's right, the passenger pigeons. Of course, they passed in the Cincinnati Zoo. They had the last surviving mating pairs, the Carolina parakeet and the passenger pigeons. Guess where those mating pairs came from? Dogwood Park. That was a nature preserve established by Phoebe Ferris. And she had, I mean, can you imagine? It was in the Cincinnati newspaper, people thought she was insane. Because she said, one day, if it keeps up, these birds will go extinct. And people laughed at her. She took part of her money to hire game wardens to protect these birds. People called her insane. Of course, we know in the end she was correct. So, but in other words, this idea of preserving and conserving the historic environmental resources has a long history here in the village of Marymount, going back with Phoebe Ferris. And then this was reinforced by a neighbor of Marymount. Of course, at that time, I know a lot of you go cringe when I say this, and you've heard me say it before, where I'm standing, 1871, this was Madisonville. Madisonville extended all the way to the Little Miami River. So, and at that time, that's why the archaeological site known as the Madisonville site is located in Marymount. It was Madisonville at that time period. Excavated by the late Dr. Charles Lewis Metz. These are artifacts that actually were found by Phoebe Ferris, but this is the handwriting of Charles Lewis Metz. These are now at the Cincinnati Museum Center, and you can see Dr. Charles Metz with his daughters. What really put Marymount on the map was when he took his findings from the archaeological sites in Marymount and exhibited them at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And this area right in here, I don't know how well you can see it, there's a woolly mammoth right there. There are totem poles here from the northwest coast, but this area here, this entire building was called the Anthropology Building in 1893, and all those artifacts on display, which are now at Harvard University at the Peabody Museum. Hopefully we can get some back for exhibition here in Marymount. Those were ones excavated right here in the village. And that really attracted world attention. Much of what we know, these are all archaeological sites in the Little Miami River Valley, which were discovered by the late Dr. Charles Lewis Metz. In fact, there's such a concentration of them, they essentially, in the 1960s, an area of this was considered an archaeological district. In fact, there were so many, 2 archaeological districts were made. Now, you can imagine the Ohio Department of Transportation looking at this. Where are you going to put a highway? Gee whiz. There's not many right here. So, and they, of course, some of you have seen this map before. These are the National Register archaeological districts, which they cannot touch. But originally, and the State Historic Preservation Office really doesn't like me asking the question, but when I first started talking to you all about the prehistory, the archaeology of Marymount, this was a square. One of the things they did was remove that chunk of the square, freeing up, this is the lower 80. So that was originally part of the Hahn Field. Of course, your mayor asked the University of Cincinnati, why not, when that happened, he asked us to look to see, he said, surely there must be something significant down there. He knew, we went down there, and sure enough, one of the more important archaeological sites in the state of Ohio was found. This is a aerial photo, high-resolution aerial photo of Marymount. Did anyone see in the news a while back about a Maya city-state being found in the Yucatan Peninsula using a particular type of imaging called LIDAR?
Yeah.
No. I decided to do that for Marymount. So here you can see the trees, the buildings, the greens. What LIDAR does is look through all that. And this is what that area looks like. This is using LIDAR. It uses laser beams bouncing off the surface rather than an optical photo. But one of the things that's rather interesting, and you get to see it, but it really jumps off the map at you, this is an original channel of the Little Miami River. And I know many of you have walked down there. Before Europeans showed up, that was all the width of the Little Miami River. The Little Miami River, as we see it today, is a byproduct of water management, deforestation, and agriculture, throwing a lot of sediment. So what's happened is the river has become broad and shallow. Before Europeans arrived, the Little Miami River was right here. And guess where the archaeological site we found was? It's right here. The village actually was occupied right along this meander scarp. But there's some other interesting features. I've just pointed out a few. I just typed them in before I came. But just to point out, there are things you can see using LIDAR. I know Don Keyes often said, well, the cemetery where Phoebe Ferris is buried is, rumor has it, it's a mound. It actually is a mound. And you can actually see the mound very nicely on LIDAR. And although it's been flattened, the circular enclosure right here at the corner of is it, what's this? This is Route 50, Wooster Pike, and is that Plainfield?
Oak is where the cemetery
Plainfield? So, right here at the corner, right across the street from the school where I used to be a Boy Scout at, but nevertheless, you can still see the circular enclosure and part of the remains of the mounds. Not only that, what's really interesting, this is Marymount Avenue. The last 3 homes, 1, 2, 3, are actually built on what Dr. Charles Metz called the Stites earthworks. So even though the houses are there, using LiDAR, you can still see remains of these earthworks there that are literally sitting beneath and around the yards of these homes. But the other thing that shows up in LiDAR is this is where the swimming pool is right here. But here you can see the mound, the very large burial mound that most people don't know about. This is where, I mean, it's the largest mound in this entire region. To give you some comparison, have anyone been to Newtown to the Oddfellows Cemetery, also known as the Flag Spring or Flagstone Cemetery? There's that mound. This one's even bigger. You don't notice it because there's trees on it. And here's a smaller mound also in the cemetery. So there's these two mounds right here. Another little mound over here. So they're monstrous. Here, of course, is the Madisonville site. So these are the kind of tools we use. And of course, as many of you see, we use archaeological excavation. And I'd like to invite you all this June, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, if it's not pouring down the rain, we'll be down there from 8 a.m. till 2 p.m. Please come join us. Bring your families, bring children. You're welcome to work with us. The more, the merrier. And this past summer, we found some rather remarkable things. I am still in shock. One of the things we did this past summer in 2017, was we wanted to know, is there anything deeper? We know that about 30 centimeters down, about this far down, we found the remains of a village that existed at the time of Spanish contact. We even found remains of a Roman Catholic chalice, just a little fragment of one, which suggested, and elsewhere at the Madisonville site, 2 chalices were found, and they were made out of Native American pottery. The fragment we found was Spanish. So we found Spanish copper. We found Venetian glass beads that came from Venice that were here at the village between 15 and 1600s. I mean, absolutely remarkable. But I wanted to know, was there anything deeper? Remains of the village, one of the things that we found, you can see this nice circular, this is what we call a post mold. The way we identify where a post was, where a dwelling is to look for patterns, circular patterns, that are different than the surrounding soil. And what we found was evidence extremely rare of a longhouse. And based on our geophysical work, there's a lot of these. Being down there this past summer in 2017, during the solstice, I thought, well, given the rough, we set up a transit and looked at the alignment. Here's the doorways. This is what it would have looked like. And you can see these vertical posts. Here's one right here going up. Would it align with the rising or setting sun of the summer solstice? It did not. One of my students was actually a retired physics professor. What we did find out, however, is it actually lines up with the moonrise at the summer solstice. Now, why is that significant? Algonquian-speaking Native Americans, in particular the Shawnee, what do they call the moon? They call it their grandmother. And they say as long as the Shawnee are, Grandmother Moon will be weaving a bowl. And when she stops weaving the bowl, that will be the end of the Shawnee. That's an oral history of the Shawnee people. So to find this astronomical alignment, this lunar alignment, I thought was quite interesting. So it was kind of fun involving the students. So imagine if you've been down there and you've seen our stakes, they're outlining that structure. This is the size of it. So, by the way, the Haudenosaunee still make these. Marcy from Indian Hill was very eager to help dig down. Unfortunately, it's not dark enough. If it was a little dark enough, what I was going to show you is there are actual layers of earth here going all the way down. Could I have you turn the lights off just for a second and see if we can show you this? Thank you. Now, it's still not so well. I thought it'd show up. You can turn it back on. But anyway, there's layers here, and from where her feet are to where her hand is, there's 2,000 years of continuous occupation. It looks like, not surprising, the area would flood, it was abandoned, and then they'd come back and rebuild. So from her feet, and we didn't get any deeper than that, 2,000 years of occupation. So in other words, prime real estate, if you ask me, in terms of this was a very important. But this next find, this is a major archaeological find and I can't write about it. I can't tell many people about it. We found that along with pottery and arrowheads. It's Spanish gold. Not only doing the chemical testing, it's not just Spanish gold, it's Incan gold that ended up in Spain, in Toledo, was stamped out. In those days, they stamped it out and then came back. Now, other specimens that we haven't found, but ones that they made a lot of these which they traded, but only to important people. Originally, these would have had small pearls hanging on the end of them. So you understand why I can't tell a lot of people about it. It'll be on display in the museum when it's completed. It belongs to you all. But you know what would happen if word got out there's gold down there. So, same thing happened to Charles Metz when he found gold in a site 2,000 years old. Next thing you know, people were crawling out of the woodwork to dig. But this fits the records of the Spanish occupation and Spanish contact, and then later French contact with the Shawnee in this area. They found them living in the area where the waterworks, does everyone know where in California where Cincinnati Waterworks were? That was a Shawnee village occupied by a chief. I barely speak English, so my French is even worse. I only have 3 vowels in my vocabulary, but his name was La Barille. La Barille, does anyone speak French? Can understand my rotten pronunciation? La Barille is French for the barrel. He had tuberculosis, which meant he had a barrel chest. When you're having a hard time breathing, your chest actually expands and you get a barrel chest trying to inhale air. But it was noted that his village during the summertime would be occupied down by the Ohio River, and he went upstream on the Little Miami River during the wintertime. And based on the animal remains and plant remains we found there, that's what this looks like. This is a seasonal occupation. So we even can identify the group of Shawnee. And at the other end of the extreme, this artifact's 14,500 years old. We found that 20 feet down. In other words, there were woolly mammoths walking around. This will also be on display. It belongs to the village. This is called a Clovis Point. 14,000. That was during the Ice Age. There were giant ground sloths. There were beavers the size of black bear. There were elephant-like creatures called the American mastodons. Heavily patinated. So this is photographed right when it came out of the ground. So just to show you some idea of what we see. Now, why are preserving these sites important? Well, one of the interesting things is that being able to visit these sites, walk in the footsteps of Charles Metz, walk in the footsteps of Phoebe Ferris, visiting historic sites are popular activities for, of course, the citizens of Marymount. And when we look at, in terms of national ranking, it's ranked as one of the 14th top recreational, just visiting historic sites. You imagine if you allow them to be destroyed. There's a brand new type of historic tourism. Many villages and cities and towns across America who have maintained their historic preservation, they're reaping financial benefits of that activities. So it's absolutely remarkable. Just a quick map to show you some idea in this area, some of the archaeological sites. The Wainema site here in Marymount Gardens. Burial mounds, this is a piece of, that's a hand bone. That's a carpal that was found where the bikers were running over. We found the Ferris Gristmill site, of course the Madisonville site, burial mounds, and of course the distillery for the kiln, and of course the Serpent Mound. Just give you some idea of the geographic distribution. In other words, there's a large concentration of archaeological sites in this area. So one of the things that historic preservation does, of course, it helps enhance community pride. I think that's what the Civic Association is all about. I mean, being good citizens. And part of being a good citizen is being a steward of this historic landscape. We're stewards of the past. And you have an incredibly rich heritage. Also, these historic sites, they're very attractive places. Marymount's a beautiful community, as you well know. I know I'm preaching to the crowd. But it's even before the buildings were built. If we look at the artifacts, where they came from, artifacts that we've excavated, here's Marymount. Look how far they've come from. As far as extreme western, northwestern Wyoming, northeastern Idaho, down to Florida, along the Gulf Coast, of course throughout Ohio, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the New Jersey area of New England. Think about movement of peoples over that great area, over thousands of years to come here to Marymount. And of course, I drove by here. Does everyone know what that is? I know Don Keys was here. You know what it is. Who can tell me what that's for?
To hold the coffee.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the transition between this world and the next. The early Marymount residents, their coffin would literally be placed there. So I drove past it today. Hasn't changed much. By the way, you can see part of the mound in the background. So, in other words, how many villages or towns or cities can boast of that kind of historic preservation? When we look at emerging trends in domestic travel, one of the things that comes out is how far Americans travel just to see a historic site. And communities such as your own who have enhanced and protected and conserved the prehistoric and historic sites are actually reaping economic benefits from that. It's what we call cultural and heritage tourism. It started out with what we call ecotourism, people wanting to go up the Amazon River. I must admit I've done it myself. Wanting to go up the Andes. Wanting to walk across Australia. But now there's a growing part of the public that actually wants to visit these significant historic sites. And when we look at it, sorry these are so dark, but the lights, but looking at some of these are more historic structures. And part of these structures, the boathouse is still there. This is the original Dogwood Trail, Nature Trail, the original, and you note where it ends. It ends, here you can see the original dam. Here's the pond where we had water in it. So these are still being maintained. So historic preservation, I guess, is what I'm arguing, and I think it's what Mayor Policastro has done. And that is essentially help build a healthy future for Marymount. And that's what historic preservation, I would argue, a healthy future, the key to that is through historic preservation. Anyway, I'll stop here and be happy to entertain any questions. By the way, if you don't have a copy of that book, I have a few I'll be happy to tell you. It has a lot more information than, yeah.
Does that your LiDAR use give you any more clues about mining bluff? One time we were talking about a serpent mound.
Oh, you can see it.
possibility.
Yeah, oh,
Does
absolutely.
that make it more clear? or-
Absolutely, yeah. Now, what the problem is, and I was actually wrong about that. I thought it was just an earthwork just to be made, till I got into Marymount Historic Preservation Archives. When they put in the concourse, that beautiful overlook of the valley, 3 bodies were underneath that embankment. In other words, there's burials underneath that earthwork. I didn't know that. I thought it's almost like the Wall of China. When they were building the Wall of China, people died and they were just buried beneath it. So there are bodies underneath that earthwork. That's what I didn't originally think about. The other thing is we found that the raw material, when we cored it, it originated down in the valley. So they were bringing the same size sand, this is basically Little Miami River sand, hauling it up. And by the way, that earthwork's right above the village. They were hauling it up that hill and building that earthwork. But what I didn't realize, it was also being used for burials. But what's happened, of course, is there are places where it is dropped down over the hill. So I, by the way, can't take credit. I did not discover it. Charles Metz did. He interviewed, when he was a very young man, back 1871, he interviewed the oldest inhabitants who were living in this area at that time, and he asked them, how long has this been here? And he said, well, it was here when we moved here. So the oldest known Ferris residence, it was there then. So he's the actual discoverer. But since then, we've lost portions of it. But on the other hand, a remarkable amount of that earthwork has been preserved. And with one of the great things the mayor's doing is removing honeysuckle, so you can actually see it now. And honeysuckle is that nasty invasive plant that it's already getting leaves on. So it's the last to lose its leaves, in December, and it's the first to get its leaves. It's a really invasive plant. And unfortunately, grave robbers, if any of you seen down by the swimming pool where it's been removed, you can actually see the pits where people would hide in there and dig into graves. But now that that's being removed, they can't hide anymore. They can't vandalize that very important site. Yeah.
Has anybody investigated Fairfax for any of these sites?
There's right down from Keebler Factory, there's a burial mound down there as well. These boundaries didn't exist, of course, in the past. But not to the extent of Marymount. What makes Marymount unique, and this was very hard to communicate, is the valley of Dogwood Park. The geology, I can't find any other place that has that exact same geology. You have limestone and shale that's almost 500 million years old. It's 460, almost 470 million years old. And sitting on top of that, you have Ice Age deposits that date not from the last Ice Age, but the Ice Age before that one. So you have all this beautiful sand and gravel. It's above the annual flooding. I mean, did water get down the lower 80 during the last flood? It came up. So having this nice perched terrace and having sand and gravel, no matter how hard it rains, the water goes right through the sand and gravel. It's prime real estate. It has this wonderful it's this very unique geology. And again, Phoebe Ferris recognized this early on, and that's why she tried to preserve it. And it's been preserved to this day. So, but that's what Fairfax doesn't have that. It doesn't have that unique geological setting. And I think it's the geology, which is why the environment, the ecosystem, the plants and animals that live there are so unique as well. So Fairfax is interesting. There is over by the Keebler area, there is a burial mound. Now, the one thing that was done recently, as many of you know, is now we have a federally protected nature center, or not nature center, nature preserve that connects the lower 80. That was a really brilliant move, and it was great that that's been dedicated and that happened. Whose jurisdiction is that? Whose property is that? The one that, the new nature preserve that connects the lower 80, behind Keebler.
Little Miami, yeah.
Is that Columbia?
Little Miami,
Yeah. Under, is it under any township?
it's Columbia Township.
Columbia Township. So there, that area's never been explored. That area's never been explored. It's possible there are sites in there, but now it's federally protected.
Even with this new equipment, they didn't slip over?
New LiDAR. I was looking, I just ran LiDAR before I came here. So I was looking at that area. So it'd be nice, of course, I gotta wait till, it's pretty muddy right now, but I would like to go over there and look. But it doesn't have, as you start moving toward the Ohio, the geology changes. So Marymount just has this very unique geology, which makes it attractive real estate. So it really is a unique environmental setting. So kind of historic preservation and the environmental conditions go hand in hand. So I think that's why there's this long-established community here. So, good question. Yes?
The longhouse that was found, how long is that? The longhouse that was found, what size is it?
It's easily the size of this room. Based on, it's the exact same size as longhouses that the Haudenosaunee, or as the Iroquois, are still building in upstate New York. It's absolutely amazing. It's large enough that perhaps as many as 65 people lived inside there. And we also know it caught on fire. So one of the things we know it burned down. That's why, and it baked the earth. And that's why we're able to follow that baked earth signature. But the other really interesting thing that we found in our excavation is the same doorway. We excavated the doorway that aligns with the rising moon during the summer solstice. It's full of river sand. And I don't know if you realize it, before there were fire departments, before water, how do you put out a fire? Wet sand. So we have evidence that people went to the river, which was right there at the time that was built, and grabbed wet sand, brought it in, and they tried to save it. They tried to put out the fire, but they weren't able to. So, but we did find archaeological evidence of that. And that was pretty interesting. So the other thing we also know, we followed that where we're excavating, to give you some idea how big this village is, it goes all the way to the Clare Railroad Trestle. So from where the mayor put the sign up, from there where that large electrical tower, it goes that entire length. Now what we don't know, was that entire area occupied all at the same time? Or did they occupy down by the railroad trestle, got so filthy they couldn't live in it anymore, and they moved downstream, and they kept moving downstream, and that's my theory, but it has to be tested. More work to, or did it go the opposite? Were they moving upstream as well? That's equally as possible. The problem is we as archaeologists can't tell that type of temporal resolution. We can't tease out those individual layers. They're just too close in time for us to tell us. The other interesting thing we found, though, on top of that longhouse was the original Ferris family home. The Ferris brothers, I don't know, I assume you all read the history of Marymount. Marymount Preservation Association has a wonderful book on the history of Marymount. And it talks about how the Ferris brothers originally acquired the land, how they acquired the land. But the question was, where did they live? Well, it must have been something special, because where that village is, we actually found some of their pottery. We found part of their homestead. We found bridles from their horses. So we found artifacts that match with the distillery. So it's a layered site. We have the Ferris family, the earliest occupation when the Ferris family first shows up, the three Ferris brothers. We have them. Then we have the Longhouse. And then we have a layer down here that's 2,000 years old. And down 20 feet, we have evidence of the Ice Age. So it's a rich history. Of course, this is where the Ohio Department of Transportation said there's nothing there, nothing significant. You can imagine why they hate my guts. I am not a popular name with them. So anyway, so yes.
Ken, as you know, we're kind of closing in on the construction work on our municipal building, and the latest estimate that I have is probably mid-May. Now, it was encouraging to see some of the range of artifacts that you displayed up there, I mean, especially over the periods of time. And you referenced there, you said that, you know, these belong to us.
Yep. Everything we excavate belongs to
Well, my
the
question
village.
is, though, is they belong to us, but I mean, do we have possession of them? Do you have possession of them? Are we going to be able to get these artifacts?
I can carry them here this evening if you want. Yeah, the plate, they belong to you. Right now, they're at, I raised over $1 million and built my own building. It's at the university. In fact, if anyone ever wants to, you have an open invitation anytime if you'd like to come see them and come see the building. Does everyone know where Miami Whitewater Park is? Part of the great parks of Hamilton County. It's the largest park. In fact, if you all want to get together and come together, I'll give you a grand tour. The late John C. Court was passionate about this area. And he was appalled that there was no facility to curate material that the University of Cincinnati's excavated, you know, as long as they've been around. So we built a building, and I got some more money from the National Science Foundation. It's on the South Shaker Farm near New Haven. I guess in terms of the post office, you'd call it Harrison, Ohio, but it's actually in New Haven, not too far from Fernald. It's right in the middle of Miami Whitewater Park, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. What I have are temperature, humidity controlled conditions. But everything from the Wainema site, labeled Wainema, and we also have material from the Madisonville site as well. That all belongs to the village. So any mayor gives me say, I want it here, it'll be here. So, but in the meantime, if you want, it's under, it's wired for, in case the rangers, if I have motion detectors and I have heat sensors. And then I have cameras in every room, and I have cameras throughout the farm. So it's in a well-secured area. But what's better security than, I mean, the police department? It's going to be right next. I mean,
So we'll have enough artifacts then to sort of rotate through what limited space that we're going to have in this edition.
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing with our artifacts, by this time period, everything's small. Like that gold artifact is that big. Arrowheads are that big. Pottery's about that big. So they're not big objects. Older, you go back in time, they get bigger. But when you're at this period of contact, these were mobile people. They didn't carry a lot of stuff with them. They made big buildings, but everything. Now the pottery they made was quite large. I think, as the mayor's pointed out, a great, nice exhibit. Material from Marymount is dispersed all over the world. Those of you who read my book, I list literally museums around the world. Yet, where is it here? People come here to see it, and people will come and to go in to see the artifacts on display. The Marymount Preservation has a wonderful collection as well. So I'm hoping to work with, she's already said she's excited to work, Karen Sullivan, work with me in terms of having material, and I think what a great opportunity for Marymount Preservation to be involved and contribute. And then, of course, material we excavated, and I'd very much like to it means a trip to Boston, but to knock on Harvard's door and say, we already know they're not going to give it up. They claim they bought it. So, and they'll throw their lawyers out. But on the other hand, if we ask for a loan, a long-term loan, there's a potential also for the Cincinnati Museum Center. Phoebe Ferris's collection, which I showed you 3 artifacts from, those are at the Cincinnati Museum Center. Someone told me the Marymount Library has a display on the Madisonville site. Is that true, or is that not true?
They did.
They did.
I don't know if you saw that.
So,
One case, I think it was like
one case.
Was that stuff from preservation?
No, that was when the library was something was being done to the museum center, and they
Yeah.
put them in various libraries while it was being
Oh,
done.
okay.
When the museum center closed, they took their exhibits and spread them from the Cincinnati airport. We have a bunch at the University of Cincinnati. I wanted the Madisonville site material at UC, to be quite honest, and they said, oh no, it's going to Marymount Library. So I've not been in there to see it. But anyway, they have material. So I think it'd be great for us to work, to start picking out, cherry picking some nice items for display. And whether you realize it or not, grade school children every year, I've talked to hundreds, your teachers are the best in the land. I don't know how they do it. I don't know if you've been around 100 screaming 4th graders, screaming at the top of their lungs. My ears ring afterwards, but having a place for them. I've literally walked with them in the pouring down rain, and they don't care. They're, so what? It's raining. They're out there. They're interested in the history and prehistory of Marymount. But actually having a place where they can go and talk, and actually having a table where they can sit around and discuss the artifacts. What a great opportunity you have now. So, but yeah, I think it's important. Cherry pick. Go through what we've excavated and what we'll recover this summer. Pick out whatever you think will look good on display. Marymount Preservation, whatever they'd like to help put on display. Go down to Cincinnati Museum Center, see what we can get from them to put on display, and also Harvard University. But the key is, one thing that makes this unique is that, one, has anyone been to the display at Newtown? There's nothing real in there.
Replicas.
Guess what? None of it's from Newtown. It's all from Anderson Township. I asked then the mayor at that time period. I said, they built these exhibits, but how come they don't have any? None of these sites or artifacts are from Newtown. They said it wasn't supposed to be like that. So what they did, the people who did the exhibits knew nothing about Newtown. So what will happen here is everything will be from Marymount. And instead of fakes, and cast, you'll have the real thing. And I think that's what gets people excited. It's so important to, of course I'm in that business, 43 years I've been teaching. For the past 43 years is getting young people excited. If you can get young people excited to be good citizens, and be stewards, to take care of where they live and get excited about where they live. And the best way to do that is have material from Marymount, real material. And you have a great opportunity. It's absolutely remarkable to have acquired that grant. That was a lot of hard work that the mayor went through to get that. So, and talk about protection. If we go knock on Harvard's door, the police station is right there. We have the chief who's go, protect it. So anyway, thanks for your service again, by the way. So, do a remarkable job. So, any other questions? All right.
Questions?